I was never diagnosed with ADHD until after my freshman year of high school. However, once I was diagnosed, I was able to start taking the medication I needed in order to focus better. After I started taking this medication, my GPA increased 2 entire grade points in a span of less than 2 years. However, I can tell you confidently that it wasn't the medication alone why I was able to succeed so much more. The main reason was more because the medication helped me focus just enough to fit the traditional mold of the ideal student just enough for my teachers to finally start treating me with more respect. It was after this change that I finally was able to believe in myself to succeed academically, and that motivated me to try a lot harder in school. Even after I was diagnosed, though, I was never properly informed about all the types of help I could receive, and many other students go through this too. If you look at the visual on the right, you will see that 1 in 5 children in the US have learning and attention issues. However, only 1 in 16 public school students actually have individualized education plans, and only 1 in 50 receive accommodations through Section 504. Even though I did count as part of that 1 in 5, I never counted as the 1 in 16 or 1 in 50. I still have to admit, though, that I was better off after being diagnosed than before. Before I was diagnosed, I was often punished for the symptoms of ADHD that I couldn't control, such as not being able to sit still in my seat for long periods of time. While this was a huge issue for my teachers, they would always deal with it by simply kicking me out of class instead of actually addressing the issue. As someone who always wanted to succeed academically, this was very hard for me because I already had a difficult enough time focusing when I was actually in class. After this happened continuously for so many years, I eventually lost hope in succeeding academically. My way of thinking eventually changed to, if you're going to kick me out of class, I'm going to make sure that it was worth it. While I fully admit that this way of thinking is wrong, I was only around 10 years old when I started thinking this way, so I didn't really know better. One memory that especially sticks out to me is from a day when I did a science lab in 7th grade. It was the only lab of that entire year, and my lab partner and I did not get along at all. She would always tell me that I would never amount to anything. On this particular day, I had enough of her always saying these negative things to me, so when she was turned around saying these things to the students behind us, I took the cow eye that we were dissecting and I dropped it in the hood of her jacket. I knew this was wrong as soon as I did it, but I still didn't care. She called for the teacher right away, and I was already mentally preparing myself to get kicked out of class or to get detention like usual, but I wasn't prepared for what his response was. He looked at me and said, "Sam, if you do something like that again, I'm going to take the scissors on this desk and I'm going to shove them through your head." I was used to my teachers treating me like I was worth less than the other students, but what he said to me this day made me feel like he saw my life as worthless. Sadly enough, though, I know I'm not alone in this experience because our education system tells many students constantly that they are worth less than others. As you can see in the graphic on the left, we spend $1,000 less per student nationally on districts serving the most students in poverty. This means that if one of these districts has 5,000 students, for example, they will experience a $5 million shortage every single year. Regardless of whether the students ever find out these exact numbers, they will learn sooner or later that they are valued less than others, and this will affect the self esteem and the achievements of a lot of these students. My personal experiences and these exact numbers are why I not only plan to be an educator and to advocate for the students who are told that they're worth less than others, but also why I based my entire capstone project on outreach programs and addressing educational inequity. First, I'd like to start off by giving some background information on my internship. The organization I worked with is La Escuelita de UCSB, which is a community service based student run nonprofit at UCSB focused on achieving educational equity. Student Parent Conference is our annual bilingual outreach program that teaches marginalized high school students from Santa Barbara and Ventura County and their loved ones about how to succeed in higher education. I'd also like to give some history of educational inequity too. In the mid to early to mid 1900s, what we saw was an era of blatant segregation between schools. Brown versus Board is a decision that a lot of people are already familiar with that ruled for the desegregation of Black and white schools. However, not nearly as many people are familiar with the case Mendez versus Westminster, which is actually very similar, but just happened in California. In Mendez versus Westminster, Sylvia Mendez was a 9-year-old Mexican girl from Orange County who didn't want to attend the Mexican schools in her area because she saw how inferior their services were. When the school district said she couldn't do this, her family sued, and the court actually ruled Mexican schools unconstitutional. This is super important because it actually set the precedent for the Brown versus Board decision 7 years later. However, these court cases didn't help us really make as much progress towards educational equity as we would hope. This is because of practices such as gerrymandering, which is manipulating the district boundaries for political reasons. In this case, making sure that certain students go to certain schools. Estimates suggest that on average, school attendance zones and school districts are 15% and 14% less Black-white diverse, respectively, than would be expected if their boundaries were not gerrymandered. On top of that, nearly 2/3 of minority students attend predominantly minority schools, and 1/3 of Black students attend intensely segregated schools with 90% or more minority enrollment, most of which are in central cities. Of course, gerrymandering, with gerrymandering, there might not be as much motivation to do this if local property tax what didn't have such a significant portion of school funding. This leads to a lot of disparities in funding between schools. In the case of Rodriguez et al. Versus Los Angeles Unified School District in 1990, the Los Angeles City School District was sued by students in predominantly minority schools because their schools were not only overcrowded and less well funded than other schools, they were also disproportionately staffed by inexperienced and unprepared teachers hired on emergency credentials. However, similar to the first two cases I mentioned before, this case sadly did not have as much of an impact as we would hope, because only 9 years later in 1999, students in California's predominantly minority schools were 10 times more likely to have uncertified teachers than those in predominantly white schools. On top of all of these disparities I've already mentioned, another issue that really gets in the way of educational equity is tracking. Tracking can look a lot of different ways. One way is where one school will have multiple schools on that campus, and one school might prepare the students better for college while the other schools don't. Another way is simply that counselors or other staff at schools always push certain students to just take the advanced classes and really make it extra difficult for other students to get into those same advanced classes. One study that randomly assigned seventh grade at risk students to remedial average and honors mathematics classes found that at the end of the year, the at risk students who took the honors classes offering a pre algebra curriculum outperformed all other students of similar backgrounds. This shows how important it is for students to be exposed to difficult curriculum, but that is really hard to happen when systems of tracking are in place. I'd also like to go over some past responses to these problems. One response is busing or voucher programs, which basically allows students to attend either better public schools or different types of schools, such as charter schools or private schools. However, All these programs really did is teach people that simply placing marginalized students in the same classroom as more privileged students is not enough to close the student achievement gaps. A lot of this is because these programs do not actually do anything to fix the actual issue of such large disparities in funding between schools. Another attempted response to this problem is affirmative action or allowing race to be a factor in deciding admissions. Affirmative action has helped underrepresented minorities get into colleges, but it has also faced a lot of pushback from government leaders. On top of that, I found a quote that I personally think addresses affirmative action pretty well. The quote says, "Many of the efforts at fostering success among students of color have focused on figuring out how to increase their access to higher education systems that have never served them well." While helping underrepresented minority students get into colleges is great, we need to do more to actually make sure that these establishments serve these minority students once they get in. That's where outreach programs come in. Outreach programs are usually a way where students, staff, or faculty at universities will reach out to either K through 12 students or community college students in order to help prepare them for university life. In fact, through the passing of Policy SP1 in 1995, UC President Atkinson made a specific recommendation to the chancellors that they set aside a portion of the outreach budget for student initiated projects. This seemed to help just about everyone involved because it meant less work on the shoulders of staff and faculty at the universities, and the K through 12 and community college students got to see current college students from similar backgrounds as them, which helped show them that they can do it too. I would like to go back to talking about my specific internship though. So my exact title was Student Parent Conference Chair for La Escuelita de UCSB, which means I was in charge of our annual outreach program. My responsibilities included making decisions on how to move the conference online since this was our first year having it virtual. I also had to facilitate multiple weekly meetings and delegate tasks among members. Top of that, I had to raise and allocate almost $7,500 worth of funds, about a third of which came from a PlayStation 5 fundraiser, which was very successful. I also had to make sure that a lot of proper paperwork was completed because dealing with so many minors means that the university does not want to be held liable for any mistakes that could happen. I also had to contact the high schools to give outreach presentations in order to get kids interested in signing up. And on top of all that, I of course had to lead the conference on the day of to make sure that it runs smoothly. Some demographics that we target in this conference include low income high school students, future first generation college students, English language learners, undocumented students, current and former foster youth, and their loved ones. We find it very important to include the students' loved ones because we not only want to prepare the students to eventually go through university, but we also want to let their loved ones know how to support their students in going through university. On top of that, I have a couple statistics that I would like to share. One statistic I found in my research is that only 10% of former foster youth will attend college. And of that 10%, only 3% will graduate. This means that only 3 out of 1,000 current and foster former youth, current or former foster youth will graduate from college. This is clearly a huge issue that needs to be addressed. Another issue that needs to be addressed is that nationally, 89% of low income first generation students leave college within 6 years without a degree. More than a quarter leave after their first year, 4 times the dropout rate of higher income second generation students. I would also like to get into some of the resources that we offer at my conference. The first resource we offer is interpretation because language accessibility is super crucial for us to make sure that we are not only making these resources accessible to people who speak English. We already realize that that's a big enough issue, and we want to address that head on. We also put on a long list of workshops, which include A3G requirements and admissions, which will tell the students all the classes they need to take in order to be eligible to apply to university straight out of high school. We also teach them about financial aid because we know, especially with dealing with so many low income students, not everyone just has $100,000 sitting around ready to spend on a college degree. We also have a workshop called Different Paths to Success, which breaks down all of the different paths that each student can take after high school so that they can hopefully find out what's best for them. This includes paths such as community colleges, trade schools, Cal States, UCs, private schools, and even out of state schools. Another workshop is Student Life and Resources on Campus, which goes over student organizations and resources they can find that will hopefully better their college experience. Another workshop we have is a mental health discussion where we get mental health professionals that work at UCSB to talk to the students and their loved ones about mental health and why it's so important to maintain it and how it pertains to going through college. We also give out activism tours, which aren't the basic tours that you get if you go to the admissions office at UCSB. Instead, another student organization at UCSB called El Congreso put together this amazing tour that compiles a bunch of history on how marginalized students have fought to have more resources at UCSB. We also do student and parent panels where we divide the students and parents, and the high school students can ask the current college students what it's like to go through college. Of course, they can ask academic questions, but we also encourage them to ask questions about how to balance social life or how to work through college. Meanwhile, the parents get to actually ask the parents of us, the La Escuelita members, about what it's like to send a student away to college, because we know that can be very scary for a lot of them. Lastly, we also have a motivational speaker, and this year's motivational speaker was Arnoldo Avalos. He was born in Mexico but moved to Northern California as a young child, where he eventually went to UC Berkeley for undergrad and then Harvard for grad school. He's also worked with large tech companies such as Facebook, Google, and Cisco, and he even won in 2016 a Medallion of Excellence from Barack Obama. On top of all that, he's set up a foundation in order to provide scholarships for low income students from Sacramento Valley, where he is from. Some more resources we offer include our care packages that we sent out to every student who signed up. This includes t-shirts, headphones, a bilingual brochure on food insecurity that you can see down below, and school supplies such as notebooks and pens. We also gave out 6 scholarships, each worth $200, and over $1,300 in iPads in order to bridge the gap in access to technology. On top of all that, we also gave out 12 grocery store gift cards, each worth $50, to also address food insecurity. Last, I'd like to go over some of my findings. One of my findings, of course, is that outreach programs are great for preparing students for college and should be more common. One study I found that backs this up is a study that looked at the early academic outreach program, and it found that this program significantly helped students complete all of the proper coursework they need in order to be eligible to apply for university straight out of high school. Another finding that I made was that personal connection is very important for the kids. I interviewed 5 alumni of outreach programs, and while they loved all of the informational workshops, they also pointed out that it was just as important for them to see current college students from similar backgrounds as them and to meet other high school students from similar backgrounds as them, even from different high schools. Another finding I made was that including parents and other loved ones can be just as necessary as the students themselves. Not only are we trying to prepare the students for going through college, but we also want to make sure that they have the proper support systems around them to make sure that they will have support if we can no longer be side by side with them as they go through college. Lastly, language accessibility should always be considered. In the case of the students that we target in the two counties that we mainly reach out to, a lot of the students' families do prefer Spanish over English. And even some of the students themselves prefer Spanish over English. One example is that a couple of years ago, one of our scholarship winners preferred Spanish over English. She hadn't even been in the US for a year at the time of the conference, but in her personal statement, she wrote all about how she had to leave her family back in Mexico and come to the US by herself and come live with a friend in order to have educational opportunities to take advantage of. Even in her short time in the United States, she was already involved in many different organizations at her school, including a robotics club. Clearly, this is a student who deserves the scholarships that we give out and more. However, if we didn't make all of our resources accessible in both English and Spanish, she might not have only not won the scholarship, but she might not have been in- motivated to attend our conference at all. Thank you.